is I went to my granny and said, would you please make me some dough bait? So that's how I did it. I don't know how you're going to do it. But I would ask Granny to make me dough bait, and she would take some Catfish Charlie, some oatmeal, some peanut butter, some Karo syrup, light bread. She would just smash all that up into something that would be really smelling good. And I would take my can of dough bait down with my special rig, and I go out onto the pier, because you can't fish for carp on the bank. Why? Because they're out there in the deep water. Where do they live? At the bottom. All right, so I'm out on the pier, and I drop that bait and hook down, and it has to go all the way down to the bottom. Now, because it's on that sinker that's free to move, the line can just go through that now. Because here's what you need to know about a carp. They're a lazy ass fish. Okay? They're not like the darting bass or crappie that go from here to there. No. Have you ever looked at a tank of goldfish? This is all they do. So that carp, he's just down there on the bottom, just minding his own business. I don't know if you know carp, but they have a really little mouth. Not like a bass or a crappie. It's a bitty tiny mouth like this. Okay? So when they really want to open their mouth, they just go. That's all they get, right there, okay? That's all they get. But they got really good nose. So they smell that dough bait. And they come up on that dough bait. Now here's what's important for you to know. They do not bite it. They suck it. Now when they're doing that, up here, my fishing pole goes slowly down on the first one. My heart is racing, because there goes the second one. And I know that the prong has now been exposed, and if I'm going to snare that catfish, as soon as it goes down, I'm going to get that like that. I'm going to reel that phone in, I'm going to find that. Now he's happy. Now he's moving. Now he's going everywhere, and he has energy spent up that you can't imagine. So I'm rolling this carp everywhere I possibly can, and you don't want to lift him out of the water, break a line. So you've got to find a way to get him to the top, get your big net, and you get that carp up. I'm excited. I have caught a carp. Nice big carp. And you're still going, throw it back. Who wants to eat that old nasty carp, right? Let me tell you about that carp. You take that carp to your granny. Say, Granny, would you clean it? And she'll say, yes. Okay? So Granny cleans the carp, and you're going, oh, what good is that going to do? Now, let me tell you. We have finished the insect protection program. We have finished the fishing lesson. Now, I want to give you a little bit of household maintenance, okay? How to keep the family strong and healthy. You clean that carp, you fillet it into chunks, you put it in a ball canning jar, and you put it in the pressure cooker, and you cook that sucker. You pressure cook it till it is pressure cooked to death. The nice thing about this is, in case you don't know, carp are full of bones. You can't even pick around them. But when you pressure cook it, those bones disintegrate. They're not even there, all right? Then you take that canning jar and you put it in the pantry for 3 years if you want to. It don't matter. Just put it in there and let it sit there on the shelf. Now, it's time to give you a cooking lesson. As if I possibly could teach you anything about cooking, but I'll try. When it's time to feed the family and you're a little bit I don't know what I'm going to give them because we're kind of getting low. You go in there to the pantry and you pull out that jar of carp that's been pressure cooked. And you open it up and you put it in a big old bowl. And you crack a couple of eggs into there. And you put yourself some saltine crackers and crunch it all up and put it in there. And then you mix in a little salt and pepper and you got yourself a mush that you can make into a patty, flop into the fry grease, brown it on one side, flip it over and brown it on the other side, drain the grease out of it and call everybody to dinner just like my granny did. Hey everybody, come on, supper's ready. I made some salmon croquettes. True story. I grew up eating carp patties that were always called salmon croquettes. And let me tell you, for all the naysayers out there, it was really good eating. I'm also going to tell you that I was in college, and I'm not teasing. I was in college before somebody said, "Are you kidding me? You eat carp? Only white trash eat carp." That was a day of revelation for me, because I just thought we had salt of the earth people. That's all. I didn't know I was white trash, but I was. So anyway, that's all true. Now, that story used to end right there. But let me tell you something pretty exciting. I was on the American Airlines flight, I don't know, to DC or something, about 4 years ago. And I am reading the American Way magazine, right? You know, back of the thing. And as I start to read through it, I come to this article that goes, Japanese carp taking over U.S. waterways. And I began reading about these carp that the farmers brought in to kind of control algae, but they didn't realize they would overbreed and become a pest. And these carp now are swimming through the U.S. waterways. There is a huge undertaking to try to keep them at bay and to keep them, but they're not succeeding. They have put up electric fences to keep them from going up the rivers. They have done everything they can, and they are scared and pretty sure they will eventually enter the Great Lakes, which is really devastating to the ecosystem, right? This is a major article about the problem with the Japanese carp that have been brought in. My favorite part of the article is when it said, you know, what do you do to get rid of the carp? One Louisiana chef has the answer. This is a true story. I began to read, and basically the story says that this chef serves this carp, but he doesn't call it carp. He changed the name on the menu to silverfin. Doesn't that sound tasty? Much better than carp. Silverfin. Say that. Silverfin. That sounds good, doesn't it? I think I'll have the silverfin tonight. And so then the chef says, and the people at the restaurant eat this. It's really tasty. And let me tell you how I prepare it. I pressure cook the carp and then the silverfin, and I put it in a bowl with some crackers and some egg, some salt and pepper, and then I make these silverfin cakes for my 5-star restaurant. I went from white trash to 5-star. True story. Now, all of that after in the evenings, told you about the day. The evenings, I can remember Granny sitting at her sewing machine, her Kenmore electric sewing machine. I remember how she would take the bobbin and put it on the spindle. I remember how the thread goes back and forth like magic as it's winding up. I know exactly how she would pull her hand just so she could clasp the bobbin to put it back into the machine. These are things I have vivid memories of, but I never sewed because I was a musician. I was playing the piano, playing the organ, playing trumpet, writing music. I was a musician. So I decided to major in music in college, which was a natural choice for me. And I was a piano major. For those of you that think I do guitar and country and western music, I am so sorry to tell you I don't. Just because I have a hat. I play Beethoven, Rachmaninoff, Chopin, Liszt. That's what I do, okay, or did. Until I started doing my own thing. But I'm majoring in also composition in college. And I was 3 months away from graduating at the time, it was probably the 7-year program, but nonetheless, I was 3 months away from graduating when, and this will hit home to a lot of us, on April the 10th, 1979, in Wichita Falls, Texas, we experienced the Moore tornado, the Reno tornado. We had an F5 tornado, came through the entire town, 1.5 miles wide, 13 miles of destruction. 5,000 houses were destroyed, 46 people were killed, and our house was in the dead center of the storm path. That tornado was so big it had an eye. So there was a front side, a silence, and a back side at the center of that tornado. And that's, my parents said, it stopped for about 30 seconds, and then the back side came. I was out of town doing a concert the night the tornado hit, 6:05 p.m. By the time the news was aware of the news, it was like 8. And I was trying to call home, 1979, no cell phones, period. There was no phone service in Wichita Falls. There was no electricity anywhere in the town of 100,000 people, completely dead. We couldn't travel home that night because the storms were everywhere and it was too dangerous. So I stayed up all night pretty much with a churning stomach, worried sick about whether my mother and father were even alive, because on the radio I heard that Faith Village, my neighborhood, had been annihilated. That's the word they used. So now I'm getting home at dawn the next morning, driving through a town that I grew up in. I'm 23 years old. I am in my neighborhood and I can't find a familiar landmark. I have to go back and start naming the streets. This one, this one, this one. This is my street. Now I'm going to go down counting the driveways until I find our pile of rubble. And guess who was in the front yard? My mom and my dad. Yay. They had survived. I didn't know if they had or not. My next question, where are the dogs? Well, Lorian got under your grand piano. She's okay. My car was on top of the grand piano. The grand piano was 3 months old. It was my graduation present. Our other little dog was under a couch in the back. They both survived. So then I started asking about friends and so on and so forth. My granny came up the next day. She was standing in the driveway with a pile of rubble, and seriously, I know that if you've seen this devastation before, you know it's not like pictures on TV. It's far worse. We're standing in the driveway in every direction, as far as my eyes can see, it's total destruction. And she takes my hands in her hands, as she had many, many times when she wanted to have a serious conversation. Hand to hand, face to face. And she looked at me and she says, Ricky boy, this is bad. This is bad. But I want you to know, there is nothing that has ever happened in this world that couldn't have been worse. Now I'm thinking about that. And I had just found out that my mom and dad made it into the storm cellar, the last 2 people in, so crowded they were hunkered on the bottom step 20 seconds before it lifted the lid off of the cellar. 20 seconds before that tornado destroyed our house. So that it could have been worse. This is also coming from a lady that lived through the Great Depression. This is coming from a lady whose husband lost 5 of his 7 children. I even think in our world today about the tragedies and the things that happen. I remember being in England on 9/11, and I remember watching the towers come down from a foreign country, and I'm trying to do the math in my head of how many people would be annihilated in those buildings. And 3,000 people is a huge national tragedy. But do you know how many people worked in those buildings that got out? So my granny's words rang true. It could have been worse. And I'm standing there in the midst of this devastation as a 23-year-old boy, learning that it doesn't matter that I have a car on top of my grand piano. That didn't matter. What mattered is that my mom and dad were okay. That's what mattered on that particular day. So the other part of the tragedy, if you want to call it a tragedy, is that I never graduated. Because all of my compositions that I had worked for all the years were gone with the wind. It was the day before computers, days before Xeroxing everything for protection. All of my manuscripts were gone with the wind.